He gave everything: his savings, his time, his trust. Together, they built a product loved by 500,000 users. Then came the whispers, the late-night meetings, and the plan to cut him out before he even saw it coming. The air crackled with raw ambition the day I met Mark in the spring of 2015, a weary guy with a wild grin and a laptop perpetually balanced on his knees. I was a freelance coder back then, scraping by in a rundown Chicago apartment with peeling wallpaper and a faucet that dripped like a metronome, when he slid into the booth across from me at a dingy diner off Michigan Avenue. The place smelled of burnt grease and stale coffee, and he pitched me an idea over a mug that chipped when I touched it. A productivity app to rule them all, he said, his eyes lighting up as he scribbled a rough interface on a napkin stained with ketchup, his handwriting a chaotic sprawl. The concept hooked me deep: tools to streamline work for freelancers like us, a market still reeling from the 2008 crash where people hustled to survive. I saw a chance to break free. So I threw in my life savings, $10,000 from years of late-night gigs coding websites for pennies, and we launched TaskForge from his cluttered bedroom. The space was a mess: piles of laundry, a sagging mattress, and a desk groaning under soda cans, but we coded until dawn, the blue glow of our screens cutting through the dark like a lifeline. Mark's laughter erupted as we debugged a stubborn bug, a sound that felt like hope, and I thought I'd found a brother in this grind, my future tethered to his wild energy. We stumbled into momentum by late 2015, releasing a beta version that snagged 10,000 downloads in just 3 weeks, a small win that kept us fueled on adrenaline and instant noodles. I shifted from my lumpy couch, where I'd slept with a pillow that smelled of sweat, to a wobbly desk in his place. The hum of his ancient PC a constant drone as we tweaked features like task syncing and deadline alerts. Mark handled the hustle, charming early users with his infectious grin during late-night Skype calls, while I stayed up past 3 a.m. adding code, my fingers numb and eyes burning from the strain. The app gained traction on freelancer forums, posts praising its simplicity, and we celebrated our first $5,000 revenue with a greasy burger run, the taste of victory mixing with the tang of onions. Early 2016 brought Sarah into the fold, a cool-headed marketer from Mark's old job at a failing startup. Her sharp wit and tailored blazers a contrast to our ragtag setup. She pitched a crowdfunding campaign with a slick video I helped edit, and the $500,000 we raised felt like a jackpot, turning heads and opening doors. Suddenly, we had an office, a cramped space above a laundromat with mismatched chairs, a ceiling that dripped during storms, and a single window that framed a brick wall, but it was ours. I managed the tech side, coding late into the night with the clack of my keyboard echoing, while Mark sealed deals, his voice booming through thin walls during investor calls. And my investment crept up to $12,000 as users surged to 500,000 by mid-2016. TaskForge was a force, its value climbing to $15 million after a corporate client, a mid-sized tech firm, signed a $200,000 contract, their check a lifeline that let us breathe. I watched Mark sign the papers in our office, his hands steady despite the sweat beading on his forehead, the room buzzing with a nervous energy as we realized what we'd built. We celebrated with cheap pizza, the cardboard boxes stacked on a table scarred with coffee rings, and Sarah raised a toast with a plastic cup, her voice cutting through the laughter as she predicted a billion-dollar future. Life shifted. Mark traded his rusty bike for a used sedan that backfired on startup, and I moved to a place with a view of the Chicago River, my $12,000 a cushion I clung to like a life raft. My parents called, amazed at my big break, but I brushed them off, too caught up in the high. Yet shadows crept and Mark started taking calls outside, his whispers muffled by the hum of traffic. And Sarah lingered after meetings, her notes a jumble of shorthand I couldn't decipher. One night, refilling my coffee from a pot that gurgled like an old man, I overheard her murmur to Mark about restructuring shares, the words chilling me as I stood frozen by the counter. My heart raced. Was this about me? And were they plotting to push me out of the dream I'd helped build? The next morning, I noticed Sarah's desk, usually pristine, had a stack of printed emails she quickly shuffled into a drawer when I walked by. Her smile too tight to trust. Mark brushed it off when I asked, saying, "Just strategy stuff, don't worry." But his eyes darted away, a crack in his usual confidence. I started keeping notes, scribbling details in a battered notebook, times of their late meetings, odd phrases I caught my gut telling me something was off. One afternoon, a user emailed praise for a feature we hadn't released yet, and I traced the leak to Sarah's test server. A jolt that made me question her loyalty. Still, I held back, not ready to confront my $12,000 and years of sweat on the line. The office buzzed with new hires, their chatter filling the space, but I felt isolated, my trust in Mark wavering as he spent more time with Sarah, their heads bent over her laptop. That night, after a long coding session, I lingered to clean up, and through the cracked door, I heard Sarah say, "We need to move fast on the shares before he catches on." My blood ran cold. Was I the target? And how long had this been brewing beneath our success? The tension thickened by late 2017 as TaskForge's success drew sharks, its value nudging $20 million, with new corporate contracts rolling in from tech firms hungry for our edge. Sarah's presence grew heavier, her push for a board seat turning our weekly huddles into battlegrounds where her arguments sliced through the stale office air, smooth but laced with a steel edge. Mark nodded along, his usual fire dimming as he avoided my gaze, his fingers tapping nervously on the table, and I felt my role shrink. My input brushed aside as she took over client pitches with a smile that felt more like a mask. One evening, sorting through a mess of emails in the cluttered office papers strewn across my desk, the hum of a dying printer in the background, I stumbled on a coded message from Sarah to Mark. Phrases like "secure the majority" and "phase him out" leapt off the screen, my name unspoken but as clear as if it were shouted, and my stomach dropped, a cold sweat breaking out as I leaned back in my creaky chair. The overhead fan whirred mockingly, and I realized they were plotting against me, my trust in this partnership fracturing with every heartbeat. The stakes hit home that night when I tallied my finances in the dim light of my apartment. My $12,000 investment, now a lifeline I couldn't afford to lose to their scheming. I called my cousin Lisa, a financial advisor with a no-nonsense voice that cut through my panic, and she walked me through setting up a trust. Her words steady as she explained how to shield my assets from the fallout. Over the next week, I navigated a notary's office that smelled of ink and old paper, my hands trembling as I signed the papers transferring my TaskForge share, my savings, and even the deed to my modest apartment to her name. It felt like a betrayal of the dream we'd built together, my chest tight with guilt as I handed over control, memories of late-night coding with Mark flashing in my mind. But survival trumped loyalty when I pictured losing everything to their greed, and I steeled myself, the weight of the decision settling like a stone. Back at the office, Sarah's demeanor shifted. She lingered longer after meetings, her notes now locked in a drawer I couldn't pry open, and Mark grew distant, his late-night calls with her stretching past midnight, their voices a muffled hum through the thin walls. The first crack widened in early 2018 when a rival launched an app with features identical to our unreleased prototype. The news hitting like a punch to the gut as I scrolled through their site on my cracked phone screen. Mark called an emergency meeting, his face pale under the flickering fluorescent lights, and announced, "We're being sued for intellectual property theft." The room falling silent as the clatter of keyboards stopped. Our small team exchanged looks, their eyes darting to me, and I felt the weight of their stares, knowing Sarah's leak had triggered this chaos. She sat coolly, deflecting blame with a shrug, saying, "It must have been a hack." But her eyes flicked to Mark, a silent signal that made my skin crawl. I spent nights digging through server logs, my fingers cramped from scrolling, the glow of my laptop casting shadows on the walls, and found encrypted emails between her and a competitor's exec. Deals hinted at invade terms like final payment pending. One message read, "Deals set once we clear him out," and I knew I was the target, my trust in Mark cracking as he stayed silent, his excuses wearing thin. I confronted him in the break room, the coffee pot gurgling like an old man behind us, and asked, "What's she planning, Mark?" He rubbed his neck, mumbling, "Just business, man. Don't overthink it." But his evasion fueled my resolve, his eyes darting away like a kid caught lying. The office turned into a pressure cooker. Whispers of the lawsuit spreading as investors pulled out, Their curly mails piling up in my inbox, each one a blow to our fragile stability. Sarah pushed harder, proposing a vote to dilute my shares during a tense board call, her voice steady as she outlined the plan, and Mark hesitated, his loyalty to me fading into a shadow of what it once was. I started carrying a battered notebook, jotting down every move, her late arrivals with coffee cups still warm, his closed-door meetings with the door cracked just enough to hear murmurs, my gut screaming I was on borrowed time. One evening, overhearing Sarah on the phone outside by the dumpster, I caught her say, "The lawsuit will force him out, then we take over," her tone cold and calculated. The words slicing through the night air. My heart pounded as I slipped back inside, the weight of her plan sinking in, and I knew I had to act. I dug deeper, finding a USB drive she'd left in the conference room, its contents a goldmine, spreadsheets tracking my share value, notes on bribing a judge, and a timeline marked Phase 2, full takeover. The betrayal stung, my hands shaking. As I copied the files, the hum of the office printer a stark contrast to my racing thoughts. I showed Mark the evidence, spreading the printouts on his desk, and asked, "Is this what you wanted?" He stared, his face paling, and muttered, "I didn't know it'd go this far," but his silence spoke louder, a confession I couldn't unhear. The next day, a legal notice arrived, the company named in a $5 million suit, and Sarah smirked during a meeting, saying, "We'll weather this, some of us will." My mind spun. Was this the end of my stake? And would the court strip me bare before I could fight back, leaving me with nothing but the ashes of our dream? The crash slammed into us like a sledgehammer in mid-2019, TaskForge's once thriving platform buckling under the $5 million lawsuit that dragged us into a courtroom battle we couldn't win. The office transformed into a ghost town, its open layout now a labyrinth of empty desks littered with crumpled paper, the fluorescent lights flickering like a dying heartbeat, and the air heavy with the musty scent of abandoned dreams and spilled coffee gone cold. My trust had shielded my assets, a small lifeline that kept me from drowning, but my $12,000 investment evaporated with the company's collapse, swallowed by legal fees, lost contracts, and unpaid salaries, leaving me staring at a bank statement that mocked me with a zero balance. Mark paced the worn carpet, his hair streaked with gray, his voice hoarse from endless calls with lawyers who promised little, trying to salvage scraps as investors fled, their emails curt and final, each one a dagger to our fragile hope. I moved back to a cramped rental near the old tracks, the constant rumbles shaking my thin walls, the silence of my lost dream a stark contrast to the chaotic energy we'd once shared. The empty space echoing with memories of late-night coding. The fallout with my family poured salt into the wound, their calls a tangled mix of concern and quiet judgment that gnawed at me. One rainy June evening, I drove to my parents' house, the wipers slapping a steady rhythm against the windshield, seeking a break from the solitude that clung to me like damp clothes. The tension hit me the moment I stepped inside, Mom cornering me in the cluttered kitchen, her hands twisting a faded dish towel, her voice sharp with worry as she asked why I hadn't fought harder to keep the money, her eyes darting to Dad's stack of unpaid medical bills. My sister leaned against the counter, scrolling her phone, muttering that my big break had let the family down, her tone laced with resentment, and the argument flared, plates clattering to the linoleum as I yelled that I'd lost everything too, my voice cracking with frustration. I stormed out into the downpour, the rain soaking my shirt and blurring my vision, the rift with them a fresh wound that deepened my isolation. Their expectations a burden I couldn't shoulder amidst the wreckage. Back home, I sifted through old TaskForge files in a cardboard box that smelled of dust and desperation, the rustle of paper a lonely sound in the dim light, and found a memo from Sarah outlining her takeover plan. Her neat handwriting a cruel reminder of her deceit. The legal battle dragged into early 2020, the pandemic locking down Chicago as streets emptied, and TaskForge filed for bankruptcy, its user base plummeting to 200,000, a shadow of its 500,000 peak. Yep, a ghost in a market we'd once dominated. Mark called me one rainy night, his voice breaking over the static of a bad connection, and admitted, "I suspected Sarah but didn't act. I wanted to protect you from the mess." The confession a jolt that left me gripping the phone, my knuckles white. I'd spent months blaming him, my anger a shield against the pain, but his silence had cost us both, and the truth stung deeper than Sarah's calculated betrayal, a wound that reopened old trust. The office closure finalized our fall movers, hauling away our desks with a clank of metal that echoed in the empty space. The lease terminated as creditors circled like vultures. I watched from the sidewalk, the cold biting my hands. My years of work reduced to dust scattered by the wind, and the loss hit harder than I'd expected. Yet a spark flickered in the gloom, teaming up with Mike, a quiet coder who'd stayed loyal through the chaos. I pulled my last $500, scraped from odd jobs, to launch Workbit, a tutoring app for students trapped at home with spotty internet. We coded in my living room, surrounded by stacks of old textbooks and a flickering lamp. The hum of my laptop a new rhythm, and the demand surged as schools shut down. Hitting 5,000 users by late 2020, the growth was fragile, each download a small victory, but it felt like a lifeline, a chance to rebuild from the ashes of TaskForge's ruin. One dreary November afternoon, sorting through that same box of relics, I found an email from Mark, sent months ago, proposing a partnership to rebuild what we'd lost. The words blurred as I read, his regret palpable in lines like I should have stopped her, and I called him. Our first talk in ages, his voice wary but hopeful as he said, "We could try again if you're willing to trust me once more." I hesitated, the image of Sarah's smirk flashing in my mind, the pain of losing $12,000 and my faith in him a heavy chain around my neck. My parents left a voicemail, Mom's tone softer, asking to talk, her voice trembling with a hint of apology, and I wondered if reconciliation with them was possible after the harsh words. My sister texted, a rare olive branch, suggesting coffee, and I felt the pull of family ties I'd nearly severed, staring at the Chicago skyline from my tiny window. The city lights flickering like distant stars against a cloudy sky. I weighed my choices: rejoin Mark and risk more pain, pouring my fragile hope into a partnership that might crumble, or build Workbit alone, carving my own path with Mike's steady support. The betrayal lingered, a scar I couldn't erase, etched in every late-night coding session and every dollar loss. But so did hope, a quiet ember in the dark. Mike suggested expanding Workbit with a live chat feature, his voice calm as he sketched it on a napkin, mirroring our TaskForge start, and I saw a future I could shape. Mark's offer hung in the air, a chance to reclaim what we'd built. But the memory of his silence gnawed at me, a doubt I couldn't shake. My phone buzzed with another text from my sister, a simple "I'm sorry," and I wondered if forgiveness could mend what was broken. The decision loomed: was this a chance to rise together, betting on a fragile trust, or should I let the past go, standing on my own with Workbit? The choice a storm cloud threatening to break as I stood there, lost in thought.